Hey guys, Archer here, a first year medical student. Today I'm going to be going through how I structured my study preparation upcoming to exams to ensure that I knew everything that I needed to before I sat that exam. The technique is called the retrospective timetable, and it's something I found out from listening to Ali Abdaal's videos, and it's something I've used consistently from then, which has allowed me to do well in the exams and make sure that I've got everything covered before it happens. I've got all of this explained in a lot more detail in my other video, which is a little bit longer, which explains exactly what I go through when I'm in a study session. If you haven't watched it already, please check it out if you can. It provides a good insight about what I'm actually doing within my study sessions and how I actually put this into context. Firstly, we're going to look at the most common timetable, which is called the prospective timetable, and we're going to look at why people are using this and how this can work for some people, but there might be a little bit drawbacks on it. And then we're also going to look at the retrospective timetable, which is what I use and learned from Ali Abdaal. The main thing about this retrospective timetable is that it allows you to keep control about what you're studying when you spend that time to study, and make sure that you cover everything so that you're most prepared for your exam. All right, let's get into it. So the most common way that people structure their studying for an exam is using the prospective timetable. And essentially that's where you set up, I'm going to do maths from 8 to 10, have a little bit of a break. Then from 11, I'm going to do physics and up until 12. And then the thing just sort of repeats and repeats. With this system, you're able to allocate a set amount of time to the subjects that you want to get covered. This can work quite well for those who are quite disciplined and make sure that they spend all those hours effectively, but for a lot of people that can be a caveat in itself. The big caveat here is it's really hard to predict how long you're going to need to spend on each subject in the future. So 1 week you might be really good with the physics concepts, and then the next week you could be needing to spend a little bit more than the 2 hours that you've already allocated. And this issue sort of amplifies as you increase the weeks that you're planning in advance. So if you were doing a study timetable 2 months in advance, you'd probably find that you're going to be out of sync of about how much time you want to spend on each subject as you get closer to the exam. Also with this system, a lot of people approach their study sessions in a chronological order, whereby they go through the course outline or the way that they've learned it within their study sessions to make sure that they've covered each topic. There is quite a large issue with that, and that's particularly because you're not touching your weaknesses first. And that means you might actually spend a bit too much time on the stuff that you're already comfortable with and not spending enough time on the things that you really need to take a look at before your exam. I'll get into how we can fix this with a retrospective timetable, but it can really set you up well if you do it right. It essentially just keeps you proactive and on your feet when you're learning, which is the best way to keep on top of everything. Okay, so that's pretty much the timetabling system that most people use. Let's get into how we can fix some of these caveats with the retrospective timetable. So as I mentioned, the retrospective timetable is something I learned from Ali Abdaal, and I have been using it consistently since to make sure that I'm using active recall along with Anki, which I've mentioned in that previous video. So the retrospective timetable fixes the 2 major caveats that we mentioned before. The one being that you're setting a specific amount of time on a subject, and then the other that you're approaching the subtopics within it in a chronological order. And with both of these, they are suboptimal ways at approaching your study. So the first problem is you're going to have your focus in the wrong place if you are trying to set a set amount of time of 2 hours, let's say, on physics, and that's it. Your focus is in the wrong place because you need to actually think about the things that you're going to do in those 2 hours more so than the time that you're going to spend. So more importantly, you should be thinking about the concept that you want to cover within approximately 2 hours, because that's what actually matters. The quality is most important here, not the quantity of time that you're spending. You can spend 4 hours suboptimally learning instead of spending just 2 hours of focusing on the concepts that actually matter. So the other thing I mentioned about that second caveat is that you are approaching things in an order which is not best suited for the way that you should be learning and revising for your exams. The focus should be on your weaknesses, and that's what is fundamentally going to let you down in your tests if you don't approach them and deal with them sooner than later. Weaknesses are fundamentally what are going to let you down in that exam, so it's most important to figure them out early and do what you can to fix them up before the exam. The major benefit of this retrospective timetable is that you get to see those weaknesses very clearly and very quickly so you can fix them up. So that's basically the gist of it. We'll take a closer look at this now in Notion, and then how I've also got this set up from Google Sheets, which is where I originally learned it and implemented it. So this is what I've got set up here in Notion. And essentially this is the thing that we've been looking in previous videos as well. But we can see here that I've got a table specifically for my repetitions, or in this case, this is my retrospective timetable. We can see that in the first column, we've got the name of the subtopic. And I usually just do this by the numbers that I allocate, which I did through scoping. I'll have a video on scoping soon. Then this is just followed up by multiple repetition columns. The repetition columns are really useful here because I can firstly mention the date that I repeated the content, and then I can also rank how I went when I was repeating that content. Now, when I say I'm repeating the content, what I mean is I am opening up some of my active recall questions within this question bank. I'm testing it out and seeing how well that I can recall the piece of information, and then I'll rank it with a system from 0 to 5. In that longer video, I explain exactly how I'm going through each of these active recall questions. But essentially, if you've watched that already, you know that I will just put these numbers next to it, and then I will average the number that I get from all of these. So here it's probably around 4, and then I would go up and add it to my retrospective timetable at 3.2 and enter the date and how I went with it. Okay, so let's look at an example of me actually doing this. So let's say we went down to chapter 10. And if I give myself here a question about what are the 3 layers of the heart wall, and that would be the epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. When I open this up, I can see how I went. So I got all 3 layers of the heart right, and that one was pretty easy to me, so I put a 5 next to it. So that's in my long-term memory, and I'm always going to remember that because I feel so confident with it that I can rate it a 5. Now, I'll complete this for all of them, and then I'll figure out how I went with most of it. And let's say I went for a 3 with this one. Since today I'm recording this on the 30th of May, I will go down to here, add chapter 10, and then my first repetition, I'll put 30th of May, and we'll put a 3 next to it. Now, if you sit down and look at this a little bit more closely, we can see that I've actually skipped a few chapters here. So I haven't even covered 6 and 7, and this is where the retrospective timetable really shines. I realize at this point that I probably, when I want to go back to studying MMed, is that I want to probably touch chapters 6 and 7 before I even worry about repeating any of the other content, because I've already repeated it once. So in this case, I've already covered some more than once. So I want to make sure that I'm touching the ones that I haven't even looked at all before I even worry about touching the ones that I've touched once, and then worry about the ones that I've touched twice even later. Essentially, when I'm doing this, I want to get to the point where I've covered everything at least 3 times, and that's when I feel comfortable that I've learned it to a reasonable degree without Anki here. So Anki I'll probably use when I have a lot more months upcoming to an exam, but this method can be used for cramming, but we already know that cramming is a suboptimal way of preparing for exams. But if we need to, the option is here, and we still get to use active recall, so it'll be better than just cramming using the older, less effective study methods. Okay, so that's how I've used it in Notion. Let's also take a look about how I used to set this up in Google Sheets last year in Year 12. So here we can see how I use this in Year 12 for psychology. We're starting off here with my retrospective timetable, and we can see all of the repetitions that I've covered the content. So in fact, intro to psychology, I actually covered 5 times before the test. I actually break it up into all of the subtopics here so I can see when and how much I'm covering each topic. However, when I used this before, I didn't actually rank my sessions, so that's what I started to do in Notion. Okay, so here we can see how much I've covered each topic, and then we have on the bottom as well, each of the topics that I had to learn for the exam. If we take a look at the first one, Intro to Psychology, we can see that I've got a similar setup to what I've got in Notion, but instead of using the toggle feature, I've just got one column for questions and the other for answers. Now, instead of using the toggle feature, what I can do is just replace these answers with some white collar text, and that effectively just hides them. The other thing I did here is instead of using the rating system, I used a collar system instead. This was useful because I can see by collar how I went with each topic. And what you will find is when I cover these questions enough time, you might see that most of them become the color green, which means I feel confident with them upcoming to a test. However, some are red, which has meant I really did not get this even upcoming to the test. So then I have just the rest of the topics here, and some of them even have comments about extra notes about if I want to read a little bit more about something or ask my teacher about it as well. So that's essentially it about how I've got it set up in Notion, and then how I used to have it set up in Google Sheets. And both really work, and they're just your own personal preference really. So hopefully this helps out with making your study sessions more meaningful and structured so that you can cover specifically what you need to for your exam upcoming. If you haven't seen any more of my videos, please go check them out because there's more of this stuff about studying and how we can make our learning more effective. All right, that's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching again. Bye-bye.